The blood-red sun crested over the dusty horizon as Nora Galloway's heart thundered in her chest, the ground beneath her feet trembling with the approach of 1,000 hooves that promised certain death. It was 1885, and Buffalo, Wyoming was supposed to be her fresh start, not her final resting place. Nora had arrived in Buffalo just 3 days prior, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but 2 valises and the deed to a small dress shop she'd purchased through correspondence. At 24, she'd left behind Philadelphia's stifling society and her father's attempts to marry her off to business associates twice her age. The West represented freedom, a chance to build something that was entirely her own. The morning had started peacefully enough. She'd risen before dawn, determined to gather wildflowers to brighten her small living quarters above the shop before its grand opening the following week. The meadow beyond the edge of town had seemed the perfect spot, with its array of purple and yellow blossoms swaying in the early morning breeze. She hadn't noticed how far she'd wandered until the first rumble vibrated through the earth. At first, she thought it might be thunder, though the sky remained a clear, endless blue. Then came the dust cloud rising in the distance, followed by the horrifying realization cattle, hundreds of them, stampeding directly toward her. "Run!" The shout came from somewhere to her right, but Nora's legs had turned to lead. The nearest tree stood at least 50 yards away, and the cattle were closing in fast, their massive bodies moving as one unstoppable force. The thundering grew deafening as Nora finally commanded her legs to move. She managed 3 steps before her boot caught on a hidden prairie dog hole, sending her sprawling onto the hard, packed earth. Pain shot through her ankle as the ground vibrated beneath her palms. This was it. This was how she would die, trampled beneath the hooves of cattle in a territory she barely knew. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the impact. Instead, she felt a heavy weight covering her body, the smell of leather, sweat, and horse filling her nostrils. Strong arms wrapped around her, a man's body pressing her firmly into the ground, shielding her completely. "Keep your head down," he shouted over the deafening noise, his breath warm against her ear. Nora couldn't have moved if she tried. The man's body covered hers entirely, his broad shoulders and back creating a protective shell above her. She could feel his heart pounding against her back, matching the rhythm of the earth as the cattle thundered past on either side of them. It seemed to last forever, the ground shaking, dust clouding the air, the terrifying sound of hooves missing them by inches. Nora squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers digging into the dirt beneath her as she prayed for it to end. And then, gradually, the thundering receded. The vibrations beneath them lessened. The man remained motionless above her for several more moments before cautiously lifting his head. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, graveled with dust. Nora struggled to find her voice, her throat tight with fear. I don't think so. My ankle." Slowly, he eased his weight off her, rolling to one side. For the first time, Nora got a look at her savior. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. A layer of dust covered his dark hair and the stubble along his strong jaw. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a scrape that was beginning to bleed. "You're injured," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing." He sat up, scanning the horizon where the cattle had disappeared, then turned his attention back to her. "Let me see that ankle." As he gently examined her foot, Nora took in more details, the calloused hands that touched her with surprising gentleness, the gun belt slung low on his hips, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't think it's broken, just twisted," he finally said. "Still, you shouldn't walk on it." He looked around, then whistled sharply. To Nora's surprise, a magnificent chestnut horse trotted toward them from where it had apparently been waiting a safe distance away. "Smart animal," she murmured. "Smarter than some men I know," he agreed, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Name's Tucker Daniels. Most folks just call me Tuck." "Nora Galloway," she replied, suddenly acutely aware of the dust covering her face and the disarray of her hair. "I owe you my life, Mr. Daniels." "Tuck," he corrected, rising to his feet and extending a hand to help her. "And any man worth his salt would have done the same." "Perhaps, but it was you who did," Nora said, accepting his hand and attempting to stand. She winced as pain shot through her ankle. Without hesitation, Tuck bent and swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "I'll take you back to town. Dr. Mills can have a look at that ankle." Nora wanted to protest. She'd never been carried by a man before, and certainly not a stranger, but the throbbing in her ankle convinced her to remain silent. Besides, there was something undeniably safe about being held against Tuck's broad chest. "My horse, Rusty, will follow," Tuck explained as he settled her on the chestnut stallion before mounting behind her. One strong arm circled her waist, holding her securely as he gathered the reins with his free hand. As they rode toward Buffalo, Nora became increasingly aware of the solid warmth of the man behind her. "What caused the stampede?" she asked, partly to distract herself from their proximity. "Hard to say. Could have been a rattler or maybe a wolf. Cattle can spook at just about anything." His voice rumbled against her back. "You're new in town, aren't you? Don't recall seeing you before." "Yes, I arrived on Tuesday's coach. I've purchased the vacant shop on Main Street. I'm opening a dress shop." "A dress shop?" There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Buffalo's a far cry from Philadelphia or New York. You assume I'm from back east. Your accent gives you away, Miss Galloway." "That and those boots aren't made for prairie walking." Nora glanced down at her impractical footwear and felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I have much to learn about Wyoming, it seems. First lesson, always watch for cattle." There was a smile in his voice that made Nora's heart beat a little faster. As they approached the outskirts of town, Nora became acutely aware of how this might look to the townspeople, her, disheveled and being carried into town by a man she'd just met. "Perhaps you could let me down before we reach Main Street," she suggested. "I wouldn't want to cause gossip." Tuck's chuckle vibrated against her back. "Miss Galloway, if you're worried about your reputation, I'm afraid it's too late for that. In a town this size, word of the stampede will spread faster than wildfire, and everyone will know you've been riding with me within the hour." Nora sighed. "I suppose you're right. Still, I'd hope to make a more dignified first impression. Near-death experiences have a way of making introductions memorable," Tuck replied. "Besides, you'll find folks here are more concerned with the kind of person you are than how properly you behave." As they rode down Main Street, Nora noticed the curious glances cast their way. Buffalo was a small town. The population couldn't be more than a few hundred, and newcomers clearly didn't go unnoticed. Tuck guided his horse to a modest building with Dr. Edward Mills, physician, painted on the window. Before Nora could protest, he dismounted and lifted her gently from the saddle. "Tucker Daniels, what trouble have you brought me today?" A silver-haired man appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. "The trouble found the lady all on its own, Doc. Miss Galloway here was caught in Jackson's stampede, twisted her ankle trying to escape." Dr. Mills held the door open. "Bring her in, then. Let's have a look." Inside the small but tidy examination room, Tuck set Nora carefully on a chair before stepping back, suddenly seeming unsure of himself. "I should check on the herd, make sure they've settled," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Jackson will be worried sick about his cattle." Nora felt a twinge of disappointment. "Of course. "Thank you again, Mr. Daniels. I don't know how I can repay you." Tuck shifted his weight, hat in hand. "No repayment necessary. Perhaps," he hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. "Perhaps I could call on you once you're settled, to check on that ankle." Warmth spread through Nora's chest. "I'd like that very much." A smile transformed his dust-streaked face. "Then I'll see you soon, Miss Galloway." With a nod to the doctor, Tuck placed his hat back on his head and strode out. Dr. Mills chuckled as he pulled up a stool in front of Nora. "You've made quite an impression on our Tuck. Haven't seen him tongue-tied like that in years. You know him well." Nora couldn't help asking as the doctor gently removed her boot. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. One of the finest men in the territory, foreman at the Circle J Ranch." He examined her ankle with practiced hands. "Good news, just a sprain. I'll wrap it tight, and you'll need to stay off it for a few days." As Dr. Mills worked, Nora's mind drifted back to the feeling of Tuck's arms around her, the way he'd shielded her without hesitation. She'd come to Wyoming seeking independence, not romance. Yet something about Tucker Daniels had gotten under her skin in a way no Philadelphia gentleman ever had. "There, all finished," Dr. Mills announced, interrupting her thoughts. "I'll have my son help you to your lodgings." "Thank you, doctor. I'm staying above the dress shop on Main Street, the old Harrington place." "Ah, so you're the mysterious buyer." He smiled kindly. "Buffalo could use a good dress shop. Mrs. Mills has been complaining about having to order from the catalog for years." By the time young Peter Mills had helped Nora home, and she'd cleaned the dust from her face and hair, word of her adventure had indeed spread throughout Buffalo. 3 different neighbors knocked on her door that afternoon, bearing food and well wishes. By evening, it seemed everyone in town knew about the new dressmaker who nearly got trampled, and how Tucker Daniels saved her life. Nora sat by her window as twilight descended, her thoughts returning again and again to the cowboy who'd risked his life for a stranger. There was something about his quiet strength, the gentleness beneath his rugged exterior, that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she wondered when he might call on her, and why the thought made her heart beat just a little faster. The next morning brought more visitors bearing food and curiosity, disguised as concern. By midday, Nora had met half the women in Buffalo and had been promised enough business to keep her shop thriving for months. "It seems I have you to thank for my sudden popularity," she said, when Tuck appeared at her door late that afternoon, hat in hand, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. "I merely provided the town with its most exciting gossip this month," he replied with a half-smile that transformed his weather-beaten face. "How's the ankle?" "Better, thank you. Please come in." She stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious of her simple surroundings. The space above the shop consisted of a small sitting area, a bedroom, and a tiny kitchen, modest but clean, with large windows that filled the rooms with light. Tuck ducked slightly to enter, his tall frame making the space seem smaller. He carried a package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something," he said, extending it toward her. "Thought it might help." Nora unwrapped the package to find a pair of sturdy leather boots. "They're ladies' boots but made for ranch work," Tuck explained, a touch of color rising to his tan cheeks. "Figure if you're staying in Wyoming, you might need something more practical than those city boots." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Nora deeply. "Thank you. That's very kind. They belong to my sister," he added quickly. "She moved to Denver last year with her husband. Said she wouldn't need ranch boots anymore." "You have family in Denver?" Nora gestured for him to sit in one of the 2 chairs by the window. Tuck nodded, settling his large frame carefully onto the delicate chair. "Just Beth, my sister. Our parents passed when we were young." My father's friend, Jackson, took us in. He owns the Circle J, that's where I work. The man whose cattle nearly trampled me, Nora asked with a raised eyebrow. Tuck's laugh was warm and genuine. The very same. He feels terrible about it, wanted to come apologize himself, but he threw his back out helping round up the strays. There's no need for apologies. It was my own foolishness, wandering so far alone. Still, it was a close call. Tuck's expression sobered. If I hadn't been out checking fence lines. But you were, Nora said softly, and I'm grateful. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Tuck's gray-blue eyes held hers for a heartbeat too long before he cleared his throat and looked away. So, a dress shop, he said, changing the subject. What made you choose Buffalo? Over cups of tea, Nora told him about her life in Philadelphia, her mother's early death, her father's determination to see her married to a business associate, her discovery of the dress shop for sale in a newspaper advertisement. I needed to make my own way, she explained. My father meant well, but he saw me only as something to be protected and eventually handed off to another protector. And now you're in Wyoming, where the dangers are considerably more immediate than disapproving society matrons, Tuck observed. Yes, but they're honest dangers. A stampede doesn't care about your family connections or whether your hem is the proper length. Nora smiled. Besides, I've always been skilled with a needle. My mother taught me before she passed, and I worked secretly for a dressmaker in Philadelphia. Secretly. My father would have considered it beneath our station. She sighed. He never understood that I found joy in creating beautiful things with my hands. Most men don't understand much about women's hearts, Tuck said quietly. We're simple creatures by comparison. I doubt you're as simple as you claim, Mr. Daniels. Tuck, he corrected. And you might be surprised. Food, shelter, honest work, my needs aren't complicated. And is that all? No dreams beyond the Circle J? A shadow crossed his face. There was a time. But dreams cost money, Miss Galloway. Nora, she insisted. If we're to be friends, we should use each other's given names. Are we to be friends then? There was a warmth in his eyes that made her breath catch. I should hope so, after you saved my life. They talked until the sun began to set, discovering shared interests in books and music. Tuck had educated himself far beyond what might be expected of a ranch foreman, borrowing books from Dr. Mills and the traveling circuit preacher. As he rose to leave, he hesitated at the door. The town's holding a harvest dance Saturday next. I know your ankle might not be fully healed, but I thought if you felt up to it, I'd be delighted, Nora replied before he could finish, surprised by her own eagerness. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'll call for you at 6 then. After he left, Nora stood at the window watching his tall figure move down the street, wondering at the strange fluttering in her chest. She'd known handsome, educated men in Philadelphia, men with wealth and social standing, yet none had affected her the way this Wyoming cowboy did after a single conversation. Don't be foolish, she scolded herself. You came here to be independent, not to fall for the first man who shows you kindness. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking of the harvest dance and wondering what dress she should wear to complement gray-blue eyes. The following days passed in a flurry of activity as Nora prepared to open her shop. The women of Buffalo proved eager to help, offering advice about local preferences and bringing fabric samples from their own collections. Mrs. Mills, the doctor's wife, organized a sewing circle to help Nora finish the display garments faster. It's not every day we get someone with your talents, the older woman explained as they worked. Most girls with your skills head to larger towns, Cheyenne or Denver. I wanted somewhere smaller, Nora replied, carefully pinning a sleeve. Somewhere I could truly be part of the community. Well, you've certainly made an impression. Mrs. Mills gave her a knowing look. Especially on Tucker Daniels. He's been asking Edward about your recovery every day. Nora felt her cheeks warm. He saved my life. I imagine he feels responsible for me. Hum. Mrs. Mills smiled. Tucker's been the most eligible bachelor in the county for years. Half the unmarried women between here and Sheridan have set their caps for him, but he's never shown much interest. Until now. I'm sure you're mistaken, Nora protested, though a small thrill ran through her at the words. We're merely friends. As you say, dear. The older woman's eyes twinkled. Though I should mention Tucker owns that parcel of land just north of town. The one with the creek running through it. Been saving to build on it for years. Why are you telling me this? No reason at all, Mrs. Mills replied innocently. Just making conversation. By Saturday, Nora's ankle had improved enough that she could walk with only a slight limp. She spent extra time preparing for the dance, bathing with her precious lavender soap and styling her chestnut hair in a becoming arrangement of soft curls. The pale blue dress she chose was one of her own creations, modest by Philadelphia standards, but cut to emphasize her slender waist and the graceful curve of her shoulders. As she fastened the pearl buttons at her wrists, Nora acknowledged to herself that she wanted to look beautiful for Tuck, a realization both thrilling and terrifying. He arrived precisely at 6, standing awkwardly on her doorstep in clean denims, a pressed white shirt, and a dark blue waistcoat that brought out the blue in his gray eyes. He'd tamed his dark hair and trimmed his stubble to a neat shadow along his jaw. You look beautiful, he said, the simple sincerity in his voice more affecting than the most poetic compliment. Thank you. Nora felt a blush rise to her cheeks. You look quite handsome yourself. Tuck offered his arm, and the simple contact sent warmth spreading through her. They walked slowly to accommodate her ankle, but Nora found herself wishing the short journey to the town hall would last longer. The Harvest Dance was Buffalo's largest social event of the season, bringing in ranchers and farmers from miles around. The town hall had been transformed with autumn decorations, bundles of wheat, pumpkins, and colorful leaves adorning every surface. A small band played lively tunes while couples twirled across the floor. As they entered, Nora was struck by the way the room quieted momentarily, curious eyes turning toward them before conversation resumed, now undoubtedly centered on the newcomer and her escort. Don't mind them, Tuck murmured close to her ear, sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. They're just surprised to see me at a social gathering. I don't usually attend these things. Why not? Nora asked as he led her to a seat near the refreshment table. A shadow crossed his face. Bad memories. The last time I danced was with Mary Sullivan, before the fever took her 3 winters ago. Oh, Tuck, I'm so sorry. Nora's heart constricted at the pain in his voice. It was a long time ago, he said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. Tonight isn't about the past. Would you like some punch? The evening progressed pleasantly as Tuck introduced Nora to the ranchers and their families. She recognized many of the women from her shop preparations, and they greeted her warmly. When the band struck up a waltz, Tuck turned to her hesitantly. Your ankle might not be ready for dancing, but if you'd like to try. I'd love to, Nora replied, ignoring the twinge of pain as she stood. Tuck led her to the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her fingers in his other hand. They moved carefully at first, Tuck adjusting his stride to accommodate her injury. But soon they found their rhythm, gliding across the floor as if they'd danced together countless times before. You dance beautifully for a cowboy, Nora observed, surprised by his grace. My mother insisted that both Beth and I learn. Said dancing was the mark of a civilized person. A fond smile softened his features. She was a schoolteacher before she married my father. As they twirled around the room, Nora became increasingly aware of the strength in Tuck's hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and something uniquely him, the way his eyes never left her face. "People are watching us," she whispered, noticing the speculative glances. "Let them watch," he replied, his voice dropping lower. "I'm too busy looking at you to care." Heat bloomed in Nora's chest, spreading upward to her cheeks. She'd been courted in Philadelphia, had danced with men far more polished than Tucker Daniels, yet none had made her feel this delicious combination of safety and excitement. They danced 3 more times before Nora's ankle forced them to rest. As they sat together near an open window, enjoying the cool evening breeze, Jackson Peterson himself approached a burly man with a silver-streaked beard who moved with a slight stiffness that suggested his recent back injury. "Miss Galloway," he said, doffing his hat. "I owe you an apology for the fright my cattle gave you, and my thanks for bringing this hard-headed foreman of mine out of his shell." Tuck stood respectfully. "Boss, this isn't the time, it's exactly the time," Jackson interrupted good-naturedly. "Miss Galloway, I've been trying to get this boy to socialize for 2 years. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." "Mr. Peterson, I assure you," Nora began, but Jackson waved her protest away. "No need to explain. I've got eyes." He clapped Tuck on the shoulder. "Don't forget, we're moving the herd to the north pasture Monday. Need you at the ranch by dawn." After Jackson moved on, Nora turned questioning eyes to Tuck. "What did he mean, you don't socialize?" Tuck sighed, running a hand through his hair. "After Mary died, I threw myself into work. Seemed easier than facing people's pity. Jackson's been on my case about it for a while. And now," his eyes met hers, serious and intent, "now I'm wondering what I've been missing all this time." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities. Then someone called Tuck's name, breaking the spell. For the rest of the evening they were rarely alone, as it seemed everyone in Buffalo wanted to speak with the new dressmaker and the ranch foreman who'd suddenly reappeared in society. It was well past midnight when Tuck walked Nora home, the streets of Buffalo silent under a canopy of stars. They moved slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. "I had a wonderful time," Nora said as they reached her door. "So did I." Tuck hesitated, then took her hand gently in his. "I'd like to see you again, Nora, not just as a friend." Her heart fluttered at his directness. "I'd like that too." He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. Then, with a formality that touched her, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Nora Galloway." The simple gesture affected her more deeply than she could have imagined. "Good night, Tucker Daniels." As Nora prepared for bed, her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. She'd come to Wyoming seeking independence, yet here she was, heart racing over a man she'd known less than a week. Was she being foolish? Or had fate brought her to Buffalo for reasons beyond her original plan? She fell asleep with no answers, only the memory of Tuck's lips against her hand and the promise of seeing him again. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Nora's life. Her dress shop opened to immediate success. The women of Buffalo and the surrounding ranches were eager for fashionable clothing that didn't require ordering from faraway catalogs. She quickly hired 2 assistants, sisters from a nearby farm who showed talent with needle and thread. Tuck called on her whenever his duties at the Circle J allowed, sometimes bringing wildflowers or small treasures he'd found while riding the range an unusually shaped stone, a perfect eagle feather, once a tiny carved wooden horse he'd whittled himself during the quiet hours of night watch. They walked together on Sunday afternoons, attended church side by side, and gradually, Nora found herself sharing pieces of her heart she'd never revealed to anyone. She told him about her dreams of designing her own clothing line someday, her childhood loneliness after her mother's death, her fear that she might never find someone who valued her mind as much as her face or family connections. In turn, Tuck spoke of his parents' deaths from influenza when he was 15, how Jackson had given him not just a job but a home, the guilt he still carried over Mary Sullivan's death during the fever epidemic that had swept through Buffalo 3 years earlier. "I was away driving cattle to Cheyenne when she fell ill," he explained one evening as they sat on the bench outside Nora's shop, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. "By the time I got back, it was too late. I always wondered if I could have done something, gotten the doctor sooner, or—" "Tuck," Nora placed her hand over his, "you know that's not rational. Dr. Mills did everything possible during that epidemic. The mind knows it, but the heart—" He sighed, turning his hand to clasp hers. "After that, throwing myself into work seemed easier than facing the possibility of losing someone else." "And now?" Nora asked softly. His gray-blue eyes met hers, intense and vulnerable. "Now I'm terrified because I care for you more than I thought possible, and that means risking pain again." Nora's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I came here to be independent, not to fall in love." "Is that what's happening? You're falling in love?" The hope in his voice was unmistakable. Instead of answering, Nora leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a brief, sweet kiss that said everything words couldn't. When she pulled away, Tuck looked stunned, then broke into a smile that transformed his entire face. He cupped her cheek gently. "May I?" At her nod, he leaned in for another kiss, this one lingering and tender. It was the first of many such evenings, conversations that stretched long into the night, shared dreams and fears, kisses that grew increasingly passionate as autumn deepened toward winter. By the first snowfall in early November, all of Buffalo seemed to have accepted that Tucker Daniels and Nora Galloway were courting. Mrs. Mills beamed approvingly whenever she saw them together, and even Jackson took to making none too subtle comments about the cabin site Tuck owned. Not everyone was pleased with their relationship, however. Nora discovered this one afternoon when Alina Harrington, daughter of the town's banker, entered the dress shop with a pinched expression. "Miss Galloway," she said after Nora's assistants had discreetly moved to the back room, "I feel obligated to speak with you about Tucker Daniels." Nora straightened, setting aside the silk she'd been measuring. "What about him?" "You're new here, so you wouldn't know, but Tucker was practically engaged to my dear friend Mary Sullivan before she passed. It's unseemly how quickly he's transferred his affections to you." The word stung, despite Nora's knowledge of Tuck's feelings. 3 years hardly seems quick, Miss Harrington," Alina sniffed. "Nevertheless, there are those in town who feel he's being disloyal to Mary's memory. Or perhaps," Nora replied evenly, "there are those who had hopes for themselves that Mr. Daniels never encouraged." 2 bright spots of color appeared on Alina's cheeks. "I'm only trying to help you understand your position here." "My position is quite clear. I'm a businesswoman who happens to be courting a man of excellent character. Now, did you come to discuss dresses, or merely to spread gossip?" Alina left without ordering anything, and Nora spent the rest of the afternoon distracted by doubt. Had she misunderstood Tuck's relationship with Mary? Was she truly an interloper in a community still mourning one of its own? That evening, she confided her concerns to Tuck as they sat by the fire in her small parlor. "Alina Harrington," he sighed, shaking his head. "I should have warned you about her." She's been trying to catch my attention since we were 16, not because she cares for me, but because her father wants the water rights to my land. Then you and Mary weren't engaged. We were talking about it, yes. Pain flickered across his face. I loved her, Nora. I won't pretend otherwise. But it was different than he stopped, seeming to search for words. Different than what we have. Nora prompted gently. Tuck took her hands in his. Mary was sweet and kind, and we'd grown up together. What I feel for you, it's deeper, stronger. Like I've been sleepwalking these past years and you woke me up. Relief washed through Nora. I needed to hear that. You should hear it every day. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. I love you, Nora Galloway. I think I started falling the moment I saw you in that meadow, looking so determined and so completely out of place with those city boots. Laughter bubbled up through the tears that had gathered in Nora's eyes. I love you too, Tucker Daniels, even if you did insult my footwear the day we met. Their kiss was interrupted by a pounding on the door. Tuck rose to answer it, revealing a breathless young boy, Peter Mills, the doctor's son. Mr. Daniels, Pa sent me to find you. There's been an accident at the Circle J. Mr. Peterson fell from his horse. Pa says it looks bad. Tuck's expression transformed instantly from tender to grave. Tell your father I'm on my way. He turned back to Nora. I have to go, of course. She rose quickly, helping him into his coat. Send word when you can. With a quick kiss and a promise to return as soon as possible, Tuck was gone, leaving Nora to worry and wait. Word came the following morning Jackson Peterson had suffered a broken leg and several cracked ribs. He would live, but would be confined to bed for weeks, possibly months. As foreman, Tuck would need to take over full management of the ranch operations. 3 days passed before Nora saw him again. When he finally appeared at her door, exhaustion was etched in every line of his face. You look terrible, she said, pulling him inside and sitting him by the fire. Such flattery, he attempted to joke, but his smile was strained. Jackson's stable, but he's not taking confinement well, and we're short-handed with winter coming on. Nora brought him food and coffee, listening as he detailed the challenges facing the ranch cattle to be moved to winter pastures, hay to be stored, preparations to be made before the heavy snows arrived. I won't be able to see you much in the coming weeks, he finally said, regret heavy in his voice. The men look to me now, and I can't let Jackson down. I understand. Nora took his hand. You have responsibilities, but promise you'll take care of yourself too. The weeks that followed tested their relationship in ways Nora hadn't anticipated. Tuck worked from dawn until well after dark, often sleeping at the ranch rather than making the ride back to town. When he did visit, he was exhausted, sometimes falling asleep mid-conversation in her parlor. Nora found ways to help, sending meals out to the ranch, knitting warm scarves for Tuck and his men, visiting Jackson to keep his spirits up during his recovery. The old rancher took a liking to her, regaling her with stories of Tuck's younger days and offering surprisingly insightful advice about loving a man dedicated to the demanding life of a cattleman. It ain't an easy road, Jackson told her one snowy afternoon as she sat beside his sick. Ranch work is never done, and it takes a special kind of woman to understand that. I'm learning, Nora replied, adjusting his blankets, though I admit I miss him terribly. Jackson's weathered face softened. He misses you too. Never seen him so distracted, nearly rode into a fence post yesterday, because he was smiling about something you wrote in your letter. Winter descended in earnest, bringing blizzards that isolated Buffalo from the outside world for days at a time. Nora's dress shop remained busy with holiday orders, and she threw herself into work to distract from Tuck's increasing absences. Christmas approached, bringing with it Nora's first true bout of homesickness. though she had no desire to return to Philadelphia. The thought of spending the holiday alone in a town where she was still, in many ways, a newcomer, weighed heavily on her heart. 2 days before Christmas, as a particularly fierce blizzard howled outside her windows, Nora sat alone by her fire, trying to summon the energy to finish the dress she was making as a gift for Mrs. Mills. A knock at the door startled her, who would be out in such weather after nightfall. She opened it to find Tuck, snow-covered and half-frozen but smiling broadly. "What are you doing here?" she gasped, pulling him inside and helping him remove his ice-encrusted coat. "The roads must be impassable." "They are," he agreed, rubbing his hands together to warm them. "Had to leave my horse at the livery and walk the last mile, but I couldn't stay away any longer." Once he had warmed by the fire and changed into dry clothes that he kept at her place for such emergencies, Tuck pulled a small package from his pocket. "I was going to wait until Christmas, but I don't think I can." His voice held an undercurrent of nervousness that Nora had never heard before. She unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box, beautifully carved with wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," Tuck said softly as Nora stared at the ring, her heart pounding. "Nora Galloway, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Nora's eyes as joy burst through her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Tucker Daniels, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Nora rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "When?" she asked. "Spring," Tuck hesitated. "I've been thinking about that. Jackson's leg is healing, but slowly. He's talking about selling part of the herd come spring, says he's getting too old for this life." "What does that mean for you?" "It means I need to make some decisions." He took a deep breath. "Jackson's offering me a partnership in the ranch." Nora pulled back to look at his face. "Tuck, that's wonderful. It would mean more responsibility, longer hours, at least at first." His eyes searched hers. "I know it's not the life you imagined when you came west. You'd be a rancher's wife, tied to the seasons and the cattle. Your dress shop can continue with my assistants handling the day-to-day operations," Nora finished for him. "Tuck, I didn't come west seeking any particular life except one that was my own. Being your wife, building something together, that's more than I ever dreamed of finding." The relief on his face was palpable. "So, spring wedding," she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. News of their engagement spread through Buffalo faster than the Christmas blizzard. The town embraced the romance of it, the Eastern dressmaker, and the cowboy who'd saved her life. Even a leaner Harrington eventually offered stiff congratulations. Winter slowly gave way to spring, bringing with it preparations for both the wedding and Tuck's new partnership with Jackson. Nora designed her own wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk with delicate embroidery that had the women of Buffalo sighing with envy. Mrs. Mills organized a quilting bee to create a wedding quilt, while Dr. Mills offered the newlyweds the use of his lakeside cabin for a brief honeymoon. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect in early April. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow where they'd first met, the same meadow where Tuck had nearly lost his life saving Nora from the Stampede. It seemed fitting to exchange their vows there, surrounded by the beauty of the Wyoming spring and the community that had become Nora's home. As Nora walked toward Tuck, her hand on Dr. Mills's arm, standing in for her father, who had refused to attend a wedding he considered beneath his daughter's station, She knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Tuck's eyes shone with tears as he took her hands in his. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. Their vows were simple but heartfelt promises to love, honor, and cherish, to stand together through whatever life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tuck gathered Nora in his arms and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the watching women dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and so much goodwill that Nora felt wrapped in the embrace of her new community. As they finally rode away toward their honeymoon cabin, Tuck leaned over to kiss her again. "Happy, Mrs. Daniels." "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. Their honeymoon was brief but blissful 5 days of discovery and passion before the demands of the ranch called Tuck back to work. They returned to Buffalo to move Nora's belongings to the small but comfortable foreman's cabin at the Circle J, which would be their home until they could build on Tuck's land. The transition from independent shopkeeper to rancher's wife wasn't without challenges. Nora had to learn new skills cooking for hungry ranch hands, tending a vegetable garden, even helping with calving when extra hands were needed. She still visited her dress shop 3 days a week, but increasingly found herself drawn to the rhythms of ranch life. By midsummer, she had another reason to embrace her new home. The persistent morning sickness and undeniable changes in her body confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was carrying Tuck's child. When she told him, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently, his face alight with wonder. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the autumn months. Nora continued to work at her dress shop, though less frequently as her body changed. The women of Buffalo surrounded her with advice and support, while Tuck hovered protectively, constantly seeking ways to make her more comfortable. Jackson, now recovered enough to walk with a cane, became unexpectedly sentimental about the coming child. "Never had kids of my own," he admitted to Nora one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch. "Always figured Tuck was the closest I'd get to a son. Now I'll be a sort of grandfather, I suppose." "The very best kind," Nora assured him, touched by the old rancher's emotion. As winter approached again, Tuck accelerated his plans to build on their own land. "I want us to have our own home before the baby comes," he explained as they pored over simple architectural drawings. "Something that's ours, built for our family." Construction began despite the approaching cold, with neighbors and ranch hands pitching in to help. The house took shape quickly, a sturdy 2-story structure near the creek, with large windows to capture the magnificent Wyoming views and plenty of room for the family they hoped to build. They moved in just after Christmas, with snow blanketing the landscape and Nora's belly now prominently rounded. Their first night in their new home, lying in the bedroom Tuck had insisted face east so you can see the sunrise, Nora felt a profound sense of completion. "What are you thinking about?" Tuck asked, his hand gently stroking her stomach where their child occasionally kicked. "About how different my life is from what I imagined a year ago," she replied. "About how perfectly right it feels to be here with you." Their son, James Jackson Daniels, was born on a snowy February morning in 1887, with Dr. Mills attending and Mrs. Mills assisting. After 16 hours of labor, Nora finally held their child, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and eyes that promised to be the same gray-blue as his father's. Tuck wept openly when Dr. Mills placed the baby in his arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, gazing at his son with awe. "Nora, you're amazing. I love you so much." The first years of their marriage passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The ranch prospered under Tuck's management, while Nora's dress shop continued to thrive with her periodic oversight. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved nothing more than following his father around the ranch. Their family expanded again 2 years later with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose, named for Tuck's sister and Nora's mother. Beth, as they called her, was as fair as her brother was dark, with Nora's chestnut hair and delicate features. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons, cattle drives and harvests, blizzards and spring floods, the endless cycle of ranch work punctuated by moments of transcendent joy. James's first steps across the kitchen floor, Beth's first words, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky. There were hardships, too, a devastating fire that destroyed one of the barns, a particularly harsh winter that claimed too many cattle. The year Jackson finally succumbed to pneumonia, leaving the ranch entirely in Tuck's hands. Through it all, the bond between Nora and Tuck only strengthened, their love deepening with each challenge faced together. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Tuck arranged a special surprise. He arrived at the house midday, unusual during the busy spring season, and asked Nora to ride with him. "The children," she began, but he smiled. "Mrs. Mills is watching them for the afternoon. Come on, I have something to show you." Curious, Nora allowed him to help her onto her horse, a gentle mare he'd given her for their 5th anniversary. They rode across the ranch, now considerably expanded from its original boundaries, toward the meadow where they'd first met. As they crested the rise, Nora gasped. The meadow was ablaze with spring wildflowers, even more spectacular than she remembered. In the center stood a small table set with a white cloth, wine glasses, and a picnic basket. "How did you manage this?" she asked as Tuck helped her dismount. "I have my ways," he replied mysteriously, leading her to the table. They ate and drank, reminiscing about the day that had brought them together, the terror of the Stampede, the feeling of his body shielding hers, the strange connection that had formed instantly between them. "I've been thinking," Tuck said as they finished the wine, "about what might have happened if I hadn't been riding fence that day, if I'd been just a few minutes later, or if you'd chosen a different meadow for your flowers." "I try not to think about that," Nora admitted. "It frightens me still." "Me too." He took her hand, his thumb caressing the wedding ring he'd placed there a decade earlier. "But it also makes me grateful for every single day we've had together, for our children, for the life we've built. As am I." Nora leaned across the table to kiss him, marveling that, after 10 years, his touch still sent the same thrill through her body. Later, as they lay on a blanket amid the wildflowers, Nora's head resting on Tuck's chest, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Buffalo, determined to make her own way, could never have imagined the life awaiting her. "What are you thinking about, love?" Tuck's voice rumbled beneath her ear. "About fate, I suppose. About how the most terrifying moment of my life led to the greatest happiness I've ever known." Tuck's arms tightened around her. "I'll never forget seeing you there, so beautiful and so completely out of place with those city boots." He chuckled. "I think I started falling in love with you before I even reached you. And I fell in love with the man who shielded me with his own body before I even saw your face." Nora raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes, still the same mesmerizing gray-blue, now crinkled at the corners from years of squinting in the Wyoming sun. "I came west seeking independence, but what I found was so much better." "What was that?" he asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "Partnership. A love strong enough to build a life on." Nora leaned down to kiss him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. "Thank you for saving me that day, Tucker Daniels." His hand came up to cradle her face, eyes serious despite his smile. "Thank you for giving me a reason to live again, Nora Daniels." They returned home as the sun began to set, greeted by the exuberant welcome of their children and the comfortable warmth of the house they'd built together. As they sat on their porch that evening, watching James chase fireflies with his sister toddling behind, Nora leaned her head against Tuck's shoulder and gave silent thanks for stampeding cattle, and a cowboy brave enough to shield a stranger with his body. The land they'd cultivated stretched before them, bathed in the golden light of sunset, promising generations of Daniels to come. From terror had sprung love. From a chance encounter had grown a legacy, a family rooted in the Wyoming soil, as surely as the wildflowers that bloomed each spring in the meadow where it all began.